What's going on, everyone? This is the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat, and on today's episode, we had the pleasure of sitting down with Ronnie Fieg. He's a footwear and clothing designer and the founder of Kith, a retail establishment and streetwear brand that he launched in 2010 with stores in New York, LA, Miami, London, and most recently, Tokyo. Over the last decade, Kith has absolutely taken over the streetwear game, collaborating with brands such as Calvin Klein, Versace, Nike, Adidas, Tommy Hilfiger, and many others, as well as launching their own collections of men's, women's, and kids' clothing. In this episode, we did a deep dive into Ronnie's humble beginnings growing up in Jamaica, Queens, New York, falling in love with fashion and hip-hop culture at a young age, how he got his start working in retail, how his very first collaboration with footwear brand Asics came about, launching Kith and the early days of building out the brand, his insane work ethic and mindset when it comes to the brand's evolution, and much more. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, and as a kid, I became friends with one of my very good friends, with one of my closest friends up until today. His name is Joey Coronado, and I've told this story a few times, but he was a Dominican kid, and in fourth grade, when I started public school, which was PS 178, not far from my house, he and I both had older sisters. They were 6 years older than us, and they were basically like putting us up on the music and the fashion and those type of things that we got into in a very young age. And I felt like the cultural differences between myself and Joey, me being, my parents were, immigrants from Israel. I have Israeli parents, and then Joey being, Dominican, also his parents coming from Dominican Republic. I felt like, we were the first generation to really experience the melting pot in Queens, from our backgrounds. And it was very inspiring and interesting at the same time to see so many cultures kind of come together. So I fell in love with what Queens represented, which was like such a diverse group of people with all different cultures. And the group of friends that we had were like, Korean, and then Dominican, Haitian, African. Like there were so many different cultures that were part of our class and part of our grade that we got to see and like experience also, because when we go to our friends' houses, it was like we'd experience the food and the culture through the parents. Like, we got to see all of that at such a young age. So there was a lot of that in Queens, and then all of the fashion that came with that was incredible. So, picking up on sneakers at a really young age, and then what Tommy Hilfiger and Polo and Nautica were all doing back then was really special. They were building worlds that we really just bought into.
And for context, around what years is this?
This is this is like 1990. Around 1990. Yeah, early 90s. Like I would say 92 actually. 92. I was 10 years old. Fourth grade. I think you're around 10, right? So yeah, that was that was around the time. I started public school then. My parents couldn't afford to keep me in this school I was going. This private school I was going to was called Solomon Schechter, which was for like Israelis. That it was like basically their blueprint. Come to the States, and then it was like, where can you send your kid? Because my first language was Hebrew, so I didn't even speak, English fluently, I would say, until a little bit later in life. So, fourth grade was really the beginning of my life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So,
we're Armenian. It's not too different. You come to LA, you go to Armenian school, and then you go on with
exactly.
your life. But same thing happened with me too. My mom pulled me out of Armenian school pretty early on, like second
Yeah,
grade, and that's when I started to experience other cultures.
exactly. And it's so important, right? It's like, that's where, you know, the music, the movies, the fashion, Joey was like really into music and film from such a young age. The first like, his father, he came from a little bit more of a wealthy um, family, and his father had a really successful business. So Joey got these like toys early on. The first like Sharp view cam. I don't know if you remember what that is. Like basically the first video recorder with the screen on the video recorder, right? So we were starting to make bullshit little films from a really young age, and every time his father would take him to the mall, he'd take me too, and like keep me included and buy me things that he would buy his son. So Joey was really together. We were really bouncing things off of each other, movies that we liked, music that we liked, and continuously just putting each other onto shit.
Ronnie, what did your parents do growing up, and did they have any expectations of you that they, you know, told you early on?
Yeah, that's my father was a hardware engineer growing up, and my mother she was in retail. She was in sales, like jewelry. She was selling jewelry in the city, and I started working because I wanted. By the age of 13, a lot of those things became important to me, especially like heading into junior high school. Um, Clothing and fashion became a lot more important to me. And I couldn't afford, or my parents couldn't afford, to buy me the things I really wanted. Like I wanted polo, and my mom was buying me chaps. Like that was like so. I had to start working. It's funny because I just released this like Calvin Klein collection, and the funny story about that is like, my mom was buying me Hanes underwear, and I really wanted to wear Calvin underwear because we used to shop at this store called Filene's Basement in Fresh Meadows in Queens. And it was like a discount store, but they still had like brand names in there. And all my friends were like buying these like Calvin underwear, and I was wearing Hanes, and it was a thing because we'd ride with no shirts on in the summertime. Like we'd BMX and ride our dynos or GT Performers with no shirts on, and the waistband was sticking out. So that was like the whole like inspiration behind the video we put together. Because at the age of 13, my first check went to Calvin underwear and like a few Tommy and Polo shirts. You know what I'm saying? So my point is, my parents, once I started working, you know, I was Friday after school jetting to the city, and then Saturday and Sunday. So like every single weekend, while I was in junior high school and high school, I was working in the city, and that's the path I wanted to take. I really liked retail. I liked meeting people. I liked being on the floor, on the sales floor, and just like meeting, the people that were coming in, because I worked in a very cultural block in New York City, in the East Village called, it was called the East Village. It was 8th Street, between 5th and 6th Avenue. And during the weekends, basically it was like a block party every weekend, and all the hip hop artists and everybody would be there. So it was really inspiring to me, and it wasn't work. I was having fun from day one, just getting to experience that culture.
Ronnie, who were some of those people? I mean, you kind of transitioned from being this, kid that doesn't necessarily have a lot of the money to buy what he wanted to, working to actually purchase those things. And now you find yourself kind of in the center of, this, I assume, hip hop culture, right? Or these hip hop cultural figures. I'm not sure if they were those figures at the time, but what was that like? I mean, talk to us about those days being on that block, and you know who those folks were and what that led to.
Yeah, I mean, Wu Tang coming in, the entire clan coming in and buying Wallabies with me. Lauryn Hill buying Gore-Tex boots with me, and I've told this story a few times in the sense of like who I've helped and how legendary that era was. Diddy and Mace coming in, Jay-Z coming in every weekend. Like, and I was helping all these artists, and also listening to these artists. So like on my time off, I'm like listening to these guys, and then I'm helping them on the weekend with their footwear, and it was very surreal. And I think that I'm always going to be the same. That's why this brand is so in line with my childhood. It's like shaped by that era of that feeling, because I will always have that feeling of like the mentality that you know it was so far fetched for me to get here, starting there. You know what I'm saying? Like I started in the stock room, but I think that that time, um, the age range, like between the ages, I would say between the ages of 13 and 18, I think that whatever you loved then will be what you love for the rest of your life. You know what I'm saying? It's like I feel like that's a fact with anyone I know. Um,
Mhm.
and it's because you're loving, typically, or normally, when you think about that time in your life, you're loving those things without any of the stresses that we have today. So it's like unobstructed love, right? And
Yeah, it's like
passion
pure.
for the it's pure, exactly. And it touches you in a way where it never leaves. You know what I'm saying? It leaves a stain. And I feel like it's ingrained in me, where everything I experienced between those years, I'm always like trying to gain those feelings back myself. And then my goal, in the way that things have changed over the years, of how people consume products and emotionally build, or build emotion towards product, how consumers, or people who are as passionate as I am in this industry, how they build emotion towards product is very different. So I've made it a goal of mine to try to have people love things, or care, or build emotion towards product and things in general, the way I did when I was younger, because for me it's about love and passion, you know?
Mhm. We talk about for sure. We talk about that. We always see or hear about, and we know like the 90s era, the culture, the sort of coming of age, like everything sort of shifting in terms of music and fashion and all this stuff. And we see a lot of things today, whether it's brands or just film or art or anything that alludes to those times, and it's kind of nostalgic. And that was like a simpler time, I guess, when we didn't have like social media and everyone sort of advertising everything that's going on in the world. So what do you think about, like, do you think that today, like the stuff that's happening at this very moment, will have that same nostalgic factor that the 90s had, because everything is just so documented and out there now?
You know, that's honestly, like, that's been the topic of conversation, at any, with my wife, because my wife is 10 years, almost 11 years younger than me. And with my family, starting to think about myself starting a family and bringing in, children, and thinking about how I would raise them, and what how the next generation would look back at my generation. It's like, and I feel like every generation goes through this, right? Where it's like, oh, like things have changed so much. But my take on it, and I think it's a unique one, is that, um, or at least I've been the outlier with my perspective, and I feel like the contrast between, when I was a kid, pre-internet era, and I think I'm like a very special generation that has, like, it's really split up 50-50 in my lifetime, right? Because I'm 38. So when you think about it, like when I was like 17, 18, 19 years old, it was a very different time, um, and very different in terms of how curious we used to be versus how curious people are today. And I've always said that you can measure someone's intellect by how curious they are. And today, I think that it's gotten difficult to remain as curious because all of the answers are in your fingertips, right? So it's like when you think about, I wanted to know how many years, or I wanted to know how many years a certain animal lived on average. It was like I used to have to go to my encyclopedia and look up that animal and read about that animal, and to
Or
get the
find the
information.
smartest person on that topic and ask them, right? Like
Yeah,
you have to go out and seek the answers. It was a process.
yeah, or exactly, or use your library card and go to go to the local library. But today it's like because the answers are so they're so accessible in the sense of like it being in your fingertips, on your fingertips. It's just, I think that people don't feel like they have to be curious because they feel like if they would be, their answers would be right in front of them. So, but I don't think that's the sentiment for everybody. I'm just thinking the way I have evolved in my life. Like you don't even need to know where you're going today. You just put the address in the nav and then you go, and you don't even know if you're going north or south. And that's a very different way to look at things compared to like when I first started driving and like I needed to have directions on knowing where to go. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like, but I feel like in many ways we are a lot smarter, but are we smarter in the way where we are evolving better as a species? Like, are we going to be better humans, and communicate better with one another? And I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think we could speak about it for days. And I think about it so much. And it's because I'm at that time in my life where I'm thinking about my future family and how they're going to go through things and what they're going to be like. And all you want, I think, like as a father, which I'm not a father yet, but thinking about it, like you just want your kids to have similar experiences to how you came up and how you evolved as a person, right? So that's getting a little deeper into some things that are like
Yeah.
just the I think the current mindset right now with everything that's going on with COVID, like it's just rethinking the times, I guess.
Well, on this podcast, we like to get a little deeper than usual because, like you said, people can just Google who you are, right? And they can find out, for the most part, what your story is. And we'll get back to your journey in a second. But, I want to briefly just continue this conversation about, the word curiosity, right? You brought up the word curiosity. As kids, we were always curious. We would always question, why, how. Okay, but why? But how is that possible? Because that's possible, right? Okay, so you get to this point of curiosity and now you start having these ideas, and you now go out there and try to find if there's more things, right? I think that now we've gone from curious to critical, right? Critical in the
Mm,
sense that because everything's already out there, we now, as people that have that information or that people that can access that information, we can now critique it, right? Whether it's fashion, whether it's business, whether it's religion, whether it's politics, right? We've all become critics. And, there's two things, right? There's people that are builders and there's people that are destroyers. It's something that I learned in law school. There's people that build things up and then there's people that tear things down, right? When you're curious, you're trying to always build it up, whether you're trying to build a case, whether you're trying to build a book, whether you're trying to build a shoe, whatever it is. When you're critical, you're trying to break it down. But there's also the positive side of being critical, right? It's something that I heard in one of the podcasts that you did, which was you want to go back and redo some of the things that you had designed in the past because they're not with your current
mm,
taste. The only
mm,
reason that you can do that, the only reason you can be critical was because you all were already curious at one point and it led to whatever that product or innovation was. So I think it is a cycle, right? Like it's curiosity, critic, and then just redoing it, right? I don't know what that third C can be, but it's like recreating yourself. It's elevating oneself, right? The positive side of it. So, I guess speaking on those terms, how do you view this current generation taking what we currently have, being critical and making it better, right? Whether it's things like upcycling, whether it's, other materials that can be used that are good for the environment, whatever the case may be. Where do you see, this current generation going?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great things to say about this current generation because I feel like they care about the right things. They care about the earth, a lot. Speaking about the younger generation, they really want what's best for the earth and for the world. When you see like all of these disasters, natural disasters happening, and like people really trying their hardest to help through social media and using platforms, I think that that's a very positive, evolution of how we've evolved as people, trying to communicate and use a platform to do so. And at back in the day, you probably would be doing those things without having to speak about them, and you just keep it to yourself and help where you can. And but today, it's like when people join forces, join together to make anything happen. Literally, anything can happen. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so I feel like the younger generation, or I should say, this newer age, and I wouldn't. I'm only, I'm not super old, but I will say that I've seen a shift in mindset, and it's the mindset today is like bring people together on a common goal. You know what I'm saying? And if you're able to do that, then it could really snowball into a way bigger impact than what you could have done beforehand. So
Right.
I think in many ways it's been very positive. Obviously, it can go either way because you know the cancel culture is a whole different story. You know what I'm saying? When people, it starts to snowball the other way, and there comes the issue with you know attention span, people not
Mhm.
having much, people not being very patient any longer. Like they're not. I don't feel like the patience has gone out the window with how cheap information has gotten. So like the faster information is moving, the less patient people are. And I feel like
One
that's
one
been a
example
problem.
I can One example on that point I can think of is, music, like how different it was back in the even in the 90s when,
Sure.
like, let's say like a new an album came out, people would really take the time to like buy the album, listen to it, appreciate it. Now it's like we're inundated with so much content where like a song comes out, first 2 seconds, you don't like it, canceled,
Yeah.
done, moving to
It's
the
like
next one.
the podcast. It's like this podcast. This podcast will
Yeah.
be like, oh, one day, oh, and then the next day it's something else. So that's been the hardest problem for me because what has happened is that these actions or this behavior has changed how artists are creating content. So like because people's patience has gone down and the attention span has gone down, you're not getting artists locking themselves in the studio or in their homes for a year making an album the way it used to be. When you think about how much time some of the greats, no matter what the genre is, have spent making albums just on the music side, and then also on on the film side too. It's like they're trying to pump out as much as possible, and that's really the goal today. Instead of the goal being the quality of the product, it's like, and I feel like that's hurt substance. And substance is a word that I use internally a lot because if you can't feel the substance and it's not tangible, then it's not worth it for me to get into or to work on.
Right.
Like if it's going to be a flash in the pan, then not a good idea. So like 2 or 3 years after I started, and I think I mentioned this on the same podcast you probably listened to hear about trying to fix my older work. It's like after starting the business, um, I started to think about, hey, like what I worked on half a year ago or a year ago, like had that age, like how does it look or feel now? And some of the product aged well, but some of it also didn't. And I created this like thought process for myself where if I didn't think it would look good in the 10-year book, I wouldn't do it. So like I'm talking about in year 3, in year 2 or year 3, I was already thinking about the 10-year book. Um and I think that mentality, was really important for the progress that we made as a brand. And also like books like the Bathing Ape book, for example, that sits on my desk in my office. When you look at what Nigo did, and like to build this catalog of product through the years, it's a little different, because when you look at, you can't find that anywhere else. Because when you look at fashion houses, the designers, they don't last. Their tenure at certain brands may only last 3 to 4 years. So like when you want to see like a full body of work, you need to see somebody's progression through a decade to really understand. And designers and creative directors change within that, and that's why it's hard to find something consistent. So like consistency has been like such an important key for myself and the brand. And even when you look at brands evolution, like I mentioned, within those bigger brands, because if you're looking at a brand that has been around for a couple of decades, they're most likely going to be a very big brand. You'll notice that like the creatives, change over time, and the vision changes with that. So I think that we're in this like rare space where the brand will be 10 years old next year, and I look back at the archives consistently, and like I like to see how the brand evolves. It's like a study of mine. That's like
Right.
that's like
Yeah.
what I, instead of going and reading a book, I go and do that. You know what I mean?
Hmm. So kind of taking it kind of back again to sort of where it all started. You mentioned, you're in the stock room and all these like celebrities are coming in. You're I don't know, working with them, helping them find stuff. What comes next? After that, how did you, up until the point where you start bringing in these large brands into the store and start working with Asics and all that whole kind of thing. Like, what was that progression like?
I mean, progressing from working in the stock room to then working in sales to then becoming assistant manager, then general buyer slash general manager. That was a 15-year process. I worked for David Z for 15 years, and 11 of them were full time, and then the other four, from 13 to 17, I was working part time, like I mentioned, on the weekend. So that was an amazing education for me. That was like my school. You know what I mean? That was where I learned the most, because you're in it with people. You're learning consumer behavior when you're not really paying attention or looking to learn that. You're just learning it as you go. And it's and also being around David for as long as I have, I got to understand the business side of things, where, that's where I feel like a lot of creatives, they didn't have or don't have that part of it figured out, which is the hardest part to figure out. And it's something that I got to learn very early on, and something I'm really thankful for. I feel like every creative should go through that, because that's you could be, and today, unfortunately, like the greatest product doesn't necessarily win, which is a big problem. So that's why it's very important to understand the marketing aspect and the business side of things, to make sure that the best product could win. That's like really the ultimate goal today if you're a creator, right? So back then, picking up these different, these different brands, because David Z was a brown shoe and boot retailer, and I helped him evolve into athletic footwear. And that was a transition in the early 2000s that if you didn't make, you were going out of business. So I helped him open up accounts and, start to buy into top tier footwear that was geared more toward the local than to the tourist. And for David Z, that was a heavy transition, because it started off being local, and then it transitioned into more of a mass. And then I came in and started buying and took it more toward local. So it was like this wave of who we're going to cater to. And I had a little bit of a different business plan of what I wanted to see David Z do than what David actually wanted to do himself. So that's around the time where I thought it would be time for me to go, because I thought the local consumer is the only way, working with the local and, the people around you, that's the way you build brand equity. Like, you don't build it by selling to a tourist who comes in, buys a pack of sunflower seeds in the deli, and then leaves and never comes back. That's not how you build a business. So you had to stand for something, and the point of view at the time, at the time, your point of view became, the most important asset. Because during the recession in '08, it's like the retailers that survived were those that had a really strong point of view on what they were doing, where you had to go there to get whatever you wanted. It's not like it was like more of a necessity type of thing than a luxury. So
Right.
I learned a lot in that. I learned a lot in that process, and I got to build that business to a pretty significant business before I left.
Ronnie, you talked about a little bit about this newer generation's lack of patience, right? And lack of perhaps even focus as a result of that lack of patience. And that has led to things such as, I would say fast fashion and fast food and fast music and everything that's just fast, right? Not a lot of thought, maybe a lot of action, but not thinking about the environment, not thinking about design, not thinking about the audience. Let's just put stuff out there and let's see which one works,
What?
right?
Yeah, throw shit on the wall and see what sticks. Right? It's like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So, when you were working, from 13 to what, 25, 20, almost, yeah, 28, maybe even, you said 15 years. So how did you have the perspective, or why were you patient? I mean, was it because that was just kind of what everybody else was doing? I mean, did you really love it? I mean, was it for you a stepping stone into doing your own thing? I just talk to us about that, because I know in my young career, I'm still 28 years old. There's been a lot of times where I've been impatient or I've lacked focus, and I wanted something fast because I saw, we've talked to 150 plus founders. I saw these people building things. I'm like, I want to be that person, right? How can I
Yeah.
get there faster, right? Talk to us about
Yeah.
your perspective and how that's made you who you are today, but also how others can take you as an example and remain focused, remain patient, do what they want.
Well, that unfortunately, that's on a. I think that comes with your personality, and I feel like you're born. I feel like a lot of it has to do with something you're born with versus your environment and how you're raised. Um, I feel like it's 50-50, to be honest. And I've always been very competitive, which for myself, like, I never want to do a half-ass job with anything I do. Like, if you're going to be, a custodian, be the greatest custodian. If you're going to be a buyer, be the greatest buyer. Like, there shouldn't be like a job that you half-ass. I've always been raised. I've been raised that way, and I always believe that. I just heard Kanye actually say it on a recent interview too, and it's true. It's like, and you visit certain countries and experience certain cultures where you see how evident that is, especially in like Tokyo or Japan, and you see how serious they are about their job. And that's like my favorite city in the world. So I learned a lot about how serious people take their jobs, how seriously they take it. And I've always been that type, and I feel like my legacy and what I want to be remembered for caring about everything, caring about the work, caring about the product, caring about the people who are buying the product. So it's like the care and the love that you put into it, it can't only be into one dimension. It's multi-dimensional. Like, it's like you need to be passionate about it all. And if you're passionate only about one part of it, then you won't last. You won't have longevity. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's part of the evolution, because you might first care about one certain thing and be passionate about one certain thing. But what happens is, as you grow, you learn to love the process. You know what I'm saying? And you learn that each step of the process is so important to the overall goal, where if you don't take your time to spend time and effort into each process heading into the long-term goal, then you'll it's a domino effect. You'll break before you get there. And first, it was like important for me to even have a long-term goal, like to understand how to have that and what that means. I think that was one of the more important, parts of all this, is like being able to think that far out when you're in it for the moment. It's like the uncertainties of whether or not you're going to be around 6 months from now should have nothing to do with where you want to be 3 years from now. And I learned that early on, because if you don't have the 3-year end goal in mind of where you want to be 3 years from now or 5 years from now, I always have the 3 to 5 years like in front of me. I always know where I want to be. If you don't have that guiding star, then you're always going to think about the now, and then your work won't speak to it won't speak to each other. Like it won't evolve. You won't have the right progression in where you want to go. So I think that comes with experience. I'm 26 years. I'm doing this 26 years now. That's a long time. It's a lot of hours. And I never worked 40-hour weeks. I was always the 70-hour week guy. So I don't know how to shut off. And it's like the amount of hours that you put in, that's what comes out, and there's no shortcut, and I think that's another thing about this younger generation is like, I'm not so sure they understand the effort that needs to go in and the hard work that needs to go in consistently to get from A to B and then from B to C before you even speak about the second half of the alphabet, and that's the patience that you were speaking about before. Like, that's the work ethic that kicks in, and that's always the advice that I give any kids that ask me like, oh, what do I do? Like, how do I start? And I always give them the advice of starting at the bottom, because starting at the bottom really it gave me the opportunity to learn the business holistically and how the business works from the bottom up. And I would never change that. That's something that always stuck with me. And I'm very thankful to have had the opportunity in 1995. And I continue. I think that's been a big part of the evolution.
And to that point, obviously, you've been at this for a while and you've gained all this experience along the way, and the work, clearly speaks for itself. But, when you're kind of, younger and you're working at, at David Z, and, you start working with Asics, who's a generations old brand. I mean, Phil Knight started with them before Nike, and, they've been around for a while. How do you get them to collaborate with you and trust you to, like, effectively, like, just completely redesign their shoe? And, like, how does that whole thing come about?
That's a good question. And I feel like my love and passion for those brands, the brands that I work with, I think have been so evident and felt by the brands in the way that I speak about them and in the way that I've been buying these brands for the store as the multi-brand that we carry in the shop. So the support that I show these brands and the passion that I have for them, I think that for a brand to give you the opportunity to work with them and collaborate, they need to feel like you're going to represent the DNA of what it is that they do so well. And I've always put that at the forefront of any project that I work on, because the passion that I have, again, like, I'm trying to communicate and really make people feel. It's really an initiative of feeling. Like, I want people to feel the way I do about this product. So it's always been the most important part of a collaboration is to make sure that people understand why I love the brand, and that shows people like it can show the brand in a different light than what they're used to seeing, because these brands have bigger marketing initiatives that speak to a larger audience. And when I work on the product, it speaks to a more niche audience and a smaller group of people. So the way that I could tell a story would be very different from the way a brand does. And that's where sometimes there's a need for the brand to work with someone like me, That makes sense?
No, it does. And I feel like it was, I mean, we've seen it happen a little bit more often since then, but that was kind of like, I don't know, you tell us, like, was it common? Was it like something that you would see often for like these larger brands to work with, these up and coming sort of designers and folks who,
Yeah,
who weren't at their level yet?
Not really, not really. No, it was something that early on I had to push for because I was trying to build. Um, I was trying to differentiate David Z from the rest. You know what I mean, and just have product that no one else had. And I think that the need for that really pushed me to want to build product with these brands. And in the beginning, I was skeptical. They were skeptical, but when we sat down and put it together, and they understood, like they saw that I understood the market and knew what was missing in the market and what they weren't offering in their line. So the product that I would work on, I would find the void of what's missing and then identify that and work with them on that void. So it really helped both parties, and both companies simultaneously, because they get to cover something they're not currently doing. And then I get to offer something exclusive and fresh. And that's really how it started, and I put my name on the product back then only because I wanted the product to differentiate itself from the other product that David was carrying in the store. You know what I'm saying? Because like at the time, he was on Broadway, and he was in a very mass state of mind. So, there were Indigo Prevo and, Crocs and Skechers and like brands that were very widely distributed that I didn't want to associate my taste level and buy for the brand. Like I was buying half the brands, and then there was a buyer buying the other half. And
Yeah. Had you ever like designed a shoe before that? Like, how did you even know what to do? Was it just purely out
honest
of
on
your?
it
Yeah.
was it I didn't know what to do, to answer your question. And it took me, I still have them at my mom's house. They were like printouts of the CAD. So they would send me a CAD. I didn't even know how to work Illustrator back then. I didn't know how to work anything. Like I was printing out the CADs and drawing arrows into different panels of the shoe, and then referencing different materials based on other shoes with style numbers. I was referencing style numbers of other shoes to reference materials. And then I would give colors from a Pantone book. So, and that was a crazy way to do it, because honestly, looking back at it now, like the product reflects that process, because you're not really seeing it in front of you before you submit it. You have it in your head and you think you know what it looks like, and then the first sample comes and you're like, that's not it. So, it was a lot of trial and error, and I had to teach myself a lot to get efficient at it.
When did you know it was time to leave David Z and start your own thing and pave a new path for yourself?
I knew when I was 15. I knew when I was drawing, like I was drawing the first Kith shop. I was drawing like what I envisioned to be a sneaker shop in this like Tron looking space, like a all black tile room with like these like blue lights. That was how the first Kith shop looked, and I was already drawing it at such a young age because I just wanted to be futuristic and different with it. Um, and I loved working in the shop so much that I wanted my own shop. That was the goal of
Right.
mine from the beginning. So I knew very, very young. And like I said before, we just weren't in the same mindset of what we wanted to do. Like I wanted to speak
Right.
to a different community of people, and that's how it all started.
But when you finally decided, okay, it's time to open up, what was some of the first things that you did? I mean, and out of curiosity, why'd you call it Kith?
So Kith, uh, was first of all, it's a four-letter word, which is like ideal, I feel like. And when thinking about friends and family of the brand, it's such an important, and friends and family, like I always believed that my friends were my family. So it was like I was trying to find a word that would really just represent exactly how I felt about my friends, because I wanted my friends to be the community and the customer base for the business, and I wanted all of the people who shopped at my store to become my friends. Like so, Kith means friends. Kith is part of the phrase kith and kin, which means friends and family. So I dropped kin and kept kith because I felt like my friends were my family. and I felt like it was a very suiting word. I felt like it suited the concept very well. Um, and that's how it started. And at first, we were just a multi-brand footwear retailer who worked on collaborative footwear also. And then people wanted the retailer to become a brand. They wanted more from the retailer because we became a community. Like we had like a courtyard outside the shop, and a lot of people were coming just to hang out. And
Right.
they wanted it to stand for more than just multi-brand footwear. You know,
How did the
so
whole thing
that's how it
start? Like,
started.
did like when you leave, like how do you build the store? Like, did you have to go out and raise money? Did you just invest all your money into it? How do you get it going?
Yeah. So my partner till today, his name is Sam Ben Avraham. He was the founder, and well, there were three brothers that were founders of Atrium, which was a mecca for apparel. It was a legendary institution for apparel in Manhattan. Just like David Z was also an institution for footwear. These are like the guys that really led the way in the mid '90s, and so he also was the founder of Project Show, which was a trade show, and I was buying at the trade show, and he's a very important person in the industry that I looked up to, and he reached out to me around the time that I started to feel this way about what I wanted to do, and he asked me if I was interested in joining Atrium and doing this footwear thing for Atrium. And at first I said no, and the conversation continued until he asked me what I would like to do, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he believed in me, and that's how I raised the money to do it. Like he funded the first, it was honestly it was a small amount of money.
You started two stores. You start two Kith stores from the get go. Two retail stores, and you're ready to get this business going. How are you so convinced that what you were about to embark on was going to be a success? I mean, it's kind of rare for people to open up two stores from the get go without even testing out if their brand and if their model is going to work. And here you are in New York starting two stores. So talk to us a little bit about that and how things went.
So when I first left David Z, remember I was running 10 stores at the time, and here I was like opening literally what was 25% the size of one of David's stores, right? It was like a 800 square foot space. Um, and I knew how to do that business. That was a multi-brand footwear business, and I really understood that business well. But I got to tell you, self-doubt is a part of everyone's leap into anything. Self-doubt is always going to be a challenge for everybody starting something new or entering a new business, especially when you're not entering it, you know, as a part-time thing. This is like a full dive into like this is what I'm going to be doing now for the next X amount of years. So I felt like I was young enough. I felt like I was willing to take the risk, and I did not know for sure. No one knows for sure, but I was confident, and that's the one thing that I think people have always. I think people see that I've always been this confident person when it comes to business and to the ideas and the execution and what I do, because I really put my heart into it and I put my all into it. So um, it was September 30th, 2011 that we opened our first store, and the second store in Soho opened in November. Um, and it was uh, it was incredible. It was challenging but incredible. I remember sleeping in the Soho shop for a week before we opened, no shower, building the store with my own hands along with the GC. For we had a very low budget to build that shop. and my father came in and helped us. Like, it was really a labor of love. And when you put that much into something, you just can't let it fail. And I really believe in that. Like when you work when you work on something so hard and put your all into it, it's going to be very hard for that thing to fail, because you're so emotionally connected to it that you will yourself to do things that you didn't even think were possible. You know what I mean? You take yourself to a level you didn't even know was possible. So that was the whole mind state heading into opening that shop. And then, when we opened, it was exciting because that's exactly what was missing. You know what I mean? And I feel like, similar to Mickey Drexler, who I've had the pleasure of sitting down and having a couple of meals with in the last couple of years, I really see myself as a buyer and a merchandiser at trade, like, and at heart, because that's how I grew up in this business. So,
Mhm.
understanding what's missing from the market and understanding what people are going to like needs to align first and foremost with what I love and what I'm passionate about. But when those two things align, it's the experience really kicks in, and you're able to let that play a big part of what it is that you do. You need to have that experience to understand how to bring things into fruition.
Mhm.
Ronnie, that Soho store in New York, I mean, I've been to it. Is it the same one that you started back in 2011?
No, no, no. The one I started in 2011 was on the corner of Bleecker and Broadway,
Got it.
and about 3 years. I want to say it's 3 years, but it might be two. No, I think it's three. 3 years now. We moved to the Soho location, which is like the
Got it.
standalone building. Yeah.
Got it. Right.
And I know since that time when you first opened the two stores, you've opened up several more, and the brand has grown significantly. But I'm curious, that was kind of the time when I can imagine, like the e-commerce wave is coming about, and more brands that used to be in these sort of retail establishments are moving online and going direct to consumer, and that whole shift is happening. And so, sort of where things are at now with where e-commerce is and where retail is, how do you see that whole thing playing out, in terms of these brands having retail establishments like Kith? And do you think that it's meant for certain types of brands over others, or can everyone sort of gain from that retail experience? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the concept of this brand has always been, the physical experience in the shop. Like the whole brand was built on an experience that you're supposed to have. So the online portion of it is to give access to people who can't make it to the shop. And that's the concept. So what other people are doing and other businesses I can't really speak to because I don't know. I just know the way that we put it together. Um, and a lot of it also, we haven't spoken about the team, which has grown significantly, but also like building the team was harder than building the store, and having building the infrastructure within the back end of what makes it possible for this to exist. It's very difficult to do. You know what I mean? And that's been a major part of it too, in being able to grow the online experience, being able to grow the physical experience at the same time. And then building product design, development, production, graphics, you know, logistics, and marketing, buying, all the categories that are within the brand, finance. It's we're around 100 people now in the office, so it's not small, and it's growing because we're going to grow internationally. We opened our first store in Tokyo a couple of months ago, and it's yeah, it's not easy, and it hasn't gotten easier. Let's put it that way.
You talked early on even about just your passion for people, being around people, being on the floor, right? Interacting with team, customers, brand directors, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really what goes into the experience for the customer as well. On the flip side, when you walk into a Kith store, whether it was the one in Soho that I walked into or the one here in West Hollywood, you just feel like you're in your current generation, like you're in 2020, but with that bit of nostalgia, right? It's not this thing where you feel like you're in 1995. You feel like you're in 2020, but you also remember 1995, which is, I think, the vibe you're going for, if I'm not mistaken. I still believe that retail, it will exist, right, in some sort of form, and it'll be more experiential. And I say that because, as a fan of brands, like, I want to feel, I want to touch, I want to talk to the people there, right? Yes, you can do that online. There's going to be new technologies where you could interact with, customer representatives, online, whatever. It's just not the same, right? I can't build a relationship with you simply by having a customer service interaction online. But I guarantee if I see you in person, whether I'm a customer, or I'm a sales rep, or I'm a manager, I'm going to create some sort of energy with you, whether it's positive or negative, right? With the pandemic, obviously just changing everything, how do you see Kith, coming back? Do you see it coming back? Is it going to be even more retail? Is it going to be more e-commerce? Isn't just digital, right? Where do you see the brand evolving to?
Yeah, when you say coming back, like we've been open now for a couple of months, so we are back, and um, it's been okay since we opened. Obviously, traffic is down only because we have to control the traffic in the shop and make sure that we don't let too many people in. But where do I see it evolving to? It's going to evolve in the sense that we're going to get better at making product. And that's where I think it matters most when you speak about evolution of our brand, the Kith brand. Um, to me, when I look at the brand, when I look at the logo of the brand, what that logo has meant in the last few years has changed significantly over the years. And I think that that's because I'm seeing the process of what we're doing to evolve design and construction and categories within the umbrella, whether it's accessories all the way to outerwear. And I think we're getting a lot better at what we're doing in terms of the product. In terms of the experience in the shops are also going to evolve. Like the store we opened in Tokyo, I wish that was my current store in Soho. You know what I mean? Like, we're getting better at like building, and we're getting better because we're learning a lot through the flow of traffic and what people want from the spaces, and then we're consistently changing the concept to better ourselves. So we study. We're nerds. You know what I'm saying? At the brand, we study, we listen, and we know we don't know it all. And I still think, and I still feel, and this is, I guess, with many entrepreneurs that are similar to myself. Like, I always feel like I'm at the very beginning of something. Like, it's like I don't feel like, even though I feel like I'm 26 years in and I'm experienced as I am, I know that I haven't even scratched the surface with what I want to do. And that's because I continue to be inspired. And I think that that's the hardest thing, is like waking up every morning and feeling inspired and loving what you do. You know what I'm saying? That's a mentality. It's a mentality. So to answer your question, it's like we're going to get better at making product, and we haven't explored categories. Like, for example, our women's category, we haven't even like, it's been just an it's been experimental for us. It's been like an experiment after an experiment, and like we're consistently like trying to find our footing and like build identity. The men's has an identity because it's my closet. With women's, it's something that I had to build, and it's been challenging, but I finally feel like really, really good about where we are and where we're going. So
Yeah.
there's constantly like categories within the company and within the umbrella between men's, women's, and kids, and then subcategories under that, which have to be developed in a very unique way, and they all need to stand separate from each other but still speak to each other. And it's a moving target. It's definitely one of the more complex and complicated um, business strategies to figure out. Especially because it's multi-brand and our own, and mono brand, and then the mono brand is broken into categories, and then multi-brand is broken into categories, and then you have men's multi-brand, women's multi-brand, footwear multi-brand, and then you have men's, women's, kids, Kith brand. And then within that, you have so many subgroups and categories. And it's like, it becomes a very enormous family tree that just breaks off into crazy branches, and each one is your kid. It's like, they're all your babies. You know what I mean? So it's
when any entrepreneur starts a business, you're typically just doing everything yourself, right? Like you mentioned, building the store with your own hands, and doing this and doing that. Everything is just like kind of relying upon you until you start building out the team. So I'm curious now, at this point, when you have all a much bigger team, what is your daily involvement? Like, what do you mostly focus on over other things? Is it mainly the creative side? Is it other things as well? Like, what's sort of the involvement right now?
so I'm like really heavily involved in all of it, and I know that's like uh it's I laugh because it's like sad and then funny at the same time, because and it's not because I have to be as involved as I am in everything. It's not because I have to be in the sense of, is it going to get done? I have to be because my name has become synonymous with the brand, and I need to be in love with everything we put out. I need to be in love with it. And if I take any sort of step back, then there would be product that releases potentially, or an experience, any sort of experiential factor of what we do that might differ from what I want myself. And then I fall out of love with it. And the difference maker between what I do and other businesses is how passionate I am about everything we do. That's the biggest difference maker. So like when you see the multi-brand, even the buy that we place is so curated, and it's what I love. It's like everything that I've seen. And as far as what we make on the men's side, at least, it's like there's not one thing we make for men that I wouldn't wear, which is huge, because I don't know of many designers that do it that way. And on the women's side, it's like between my wife, my mom, and my sister, I feel like the goal is always to make product that all three of them would want. And on the women's side, I have a very unique perspective on that. And as far as the kids category goes, I just want it to be a miniature version of what we're offering for men's and women's. Because I feel like for kids, they don't have those options. So
Yeah.
I have a very unique perspective on it, but it's also very much built on personal taste. So a lot of it comes from there. And then on the marketing end, it's like people can only see the product through my eyes. And when I say through my eyes, it's like I need them to see it the way I see it so they can like it the way I like it. Because if they like it any other way, then they're liking it for the wrong reasons. And then it's like I can't build my map of longevity not fully understanding how people are connected to the product.
On that point though, like how do you? I imagine you want Kith to last a very long time, right? Even after you're gone, and you're still a young guy, and I'm sure there's still a lot to do. But how do you build, in your sense, like a brand that could outlast you at some point, and live,
Yeah.
I don't know, decades, centuries even?
No, so that's a great question, because I feel like on the same note of everything I just spoke about, the longer I'm working with my team that I currently have now, and this team has been around for a while when we speak about creatives, because the longevity really, like, on the operation side, it's like it's as important as anything, but less important when it comes to my involvement, right? So my involvement creatively, I think, the longer I work with my current team, the more they understand how I think and how I see things, and then they start to see it the same way when they work. So it's like on my, for example, like buying footwear, buying specifically, I have an amazing young kid from Queens that, you know, um, his experience. He was a planner before, but he's been buying with me now for a couple of years, and he's caught on to like how I see that world as far as he can. Like 2 years is still not a full cycle. It's like I've seen the cycles in footwear 25 years. I think I've seen about 7 cycles, and that's just like understanding when things come and go. But that comes with time and it comes with experience. But I make sure to spend the time to explain, and I invest in the people that work with me. So eventually, the goal is for them to see things and think of things the way I do. Because the way I think of things, it's not so they could think of things the way I do. It's just that the way I think of things is the way the brand looks at things. It's like I'm synonymous with the brand. I just like have a perspective from day one. My day one perspective of the brand is built off of progression and evolution. So if they came in 7 years later, they haven't understood the building blocks of what it took to get there. So it's like, it's constant, conversation that's important there. But eventually, I feel like we could get there.
As the brand grows, I think I read somewhere like a personal philosophy of yours is like you want to give consumers more than what they pay for, more value than what they're paying. How do you go about doing that as the brand grows? And can you elaborate on what that means to you?
Yeah. So the investment in the shops were the first. That was the foundation of the brand. The concept of giving people more than what they pay for, because the experience in the shop is free. You don't have to buy anything in the shop, and if you want to consume the brand for $7 or $8, you could get, you go to Kith Treats and get yourself, something special and consume the brand that way. And that was purposely done that way just to make people smile in the space so they can build an emotion to the brand without having to buy anything, really, I think that's been a very important part of the whole philosophy around it, is like, the consumer buying product. That's another part of it, is like we don't wholesale the brand. So because I don't wholesale, I can offer the product at less of a cost to the consumer because we're cutting out the middleman. We're going direct to consumer, right? So it's like being able to do that. I'm able to sell outerwear pieces that are $395 that really should be $600 to $700 or $800, and I'm able to sell, our suiting jackets, like the Becker coat for $300 when it really should be $600. So like they're going to get these pieces that normally they would find at a way higher price tag. And that's what I mean by giving the consumer more than what they pay for. And it's also in the materials and construction. It's just like what people are used to buying versus what they can expect from us, It's building that standard.
Ronnie, what's very interesting about something you said earlier, and I've just been thinking about it as well, is something that's just fascinating to me about creatives in general is that they obviously like to pave their own path, but at the same time, what that does is it engraves as a part of history this new form or this new creation that others now can follow and they can iterate on or whatever, right? And yes, your product is clothing, yes, it's shoes or accessories, ice cream, whatever. That's just kind of for me, the way I view it is the byproduct. But you as a designer, right, you are coming up with these designs or this form or this way of doing things. It reminds me a lot of a furniture maker that I was recently introduced to. His name is Sam Malouf, who no longer is alive, and I don't know if you've heard of Sam Malouf, but he designed mid-century modern, right, furniture. Even though he's passed, those that have come after him, it's still done in the eye of Sam Malouf, even though they themselves are, if not, maybe they're if not as good, if not better than Sam, it's still done through his design, right? And so for me, that's very interesting because you see that, but you don't see a lot of it in this day and age, right? You see people trying to copy others or trying to change something little, but why don't we see people taking the Fieg eye, the Ronnie Fieg eye, or the Sam Malouf eye, or the Virgil Abloh eye, and like creating in their likeness, right, and doing things the way they've done it. Like, why don't we see more of that?
Because the process from inception to execution is very, very difficult. And it's difficult enough to do it once, but the consistency is what takes the sacrifice of giving up everything in life to see these things come to life. So I think that all has to do with the way people prioritize their lives. I just prioritize this over everything. And, it's affected my health, my family, my relationships. It's affected everything because this is what I devoted my life to. It's like, this is what my passion is. This is what I feel like I was meant to do. So I feel like, to answer your question, everybody has their own version of what they think people need or people would want, right? That's like people are merchandising without knowing they're merchandising. If you're like a musician and you're making music, you're putting music out in the world that you think people need or want. So in a way,
Hopefully,
you're
hopefully.
No, I'm saying, I said they think, right? They think.
Yeah.
You're saying hopefully that's their thought process.
Hopefully that's
Yeah.
the
So
case. Like, people. Yeah.
I mean, in my point was, even musicians are merchandisers. Like, you're putting product out there in the world thinking that people need that product, obviously. Otherwise, you would just make it for yourself, right? Or you're trying to make a living, which you're thinking like, hey, this is something people will want, so I can make a living off this. For me, it's a little bit different. For me, it's like, what do I want myself in my closet? And then I feel like my passion for the product is so strong that if I can relay the message to the consumer of why I want this product as much as I do, which is all true, and it's like an organic thing to do for me, then I feel like people can build emotion to the product the way I do. It's like, if I show you my collection of product, like, I do that for myself. You know what I mean? Like, I build product to then be able to sell the product or to be able to sell the product to the world and give access. But if I show you my collection of product, like, I haven't shown anybody, but if anybody was to see how I collect the product, then people will understand my obsession with it. I am obsessed with the product that we make, like, and only the people that work in my office, the creatives, understand it, because I walk in and, like, the way I'll speak about product, it's what keeps them inspired. It's like, I just am in love with what I do. So if everybody can do that, if everybody could be in love with what they do, you'll end up with the same. And there are many people that end up on the same path. I'm not the only one that's doing this. There are many people
Right.
that are doing it. But to answer your question, it's all about the level of passion. And then even if you're as passionate as I am, now do you have the know-how on how to bring it to fruition, on how to execute and how to build it and bring it to market? That process it's not an easy process, especially today, in building a following and having consistency and being able to speak about things in a way that, feels right and makes people feel like it's organic to you. It's
Right.
tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
When you think back to, if you put yourself in the mind of 13-year-old Ronnie right now, and you look, 25, 26 years into the future where you are right now, did you ever think, or would you have ever thought that you'd be in this position? And if so, why did you think that? And if not, why didn't you think that way?
Definitely not. And I didn't, because I'm a street kid from Queens who, like, that wasn't even what we were hoping for. That wasn't the, it was like, it was never even, that's why to me, it's like such a it's such a unlikely scenario, because growing up where I grew up, like, we used to bike and hang around the corner and just, like, chill, and you know I don't know, it's just,
Where did you
I don't
think you
know.
would be? Like, what did you have like any idea of where? Like, did you have like a vision of what like
No, no,
30,
no, no,
40-year
no.
old Ronnie would look like?
No, it was never. It was never. Honestly, I still remember the feeling of being so young and looking at like even my sister and being like, I'm never going to get to that age. And she was 6 years older than me. So I remember being like 15 and her being 21. And I'm like, I'm never going to be 21. And then later it was like, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have kids. I'm never going to have like, I remember the feeling of being, I was never like, now when I tell you, I'm like looking at the business and I could see the business 3 to 5 years down the line. I never had that for myself. So it was like, it was it was crazy. And that's why I think the evolution of this brand and myself, like I'm just consistently making the best of an opportunity as tastefully and as, rewarding to myself in terms of it being organic to myself. Like it needs to feel natural. The growth needs to feel natural. It needs to feel good. I don't want to feel like I'm rushing anything. I want to feel like it's all part of the building blocks in life. I have a different perspective on it today, where when I was younger, I probably just like wanted to do as much as I can to get the furthest. And then like, I think things have changed, especially since I started the brand. And understanding that like when you look back at it, you want to make sure that you, again, like that's the most important part of this conversation, I think, is like the ability to look back and see the evolution and feel it, and look back at the archive and see, physically be able to see the growth. Because that is so important, you know what I mean? And any designer's like archive is being able to see the growth. And I think that that's something that, people had to bear with me in the beginning, as like the product wasn't nearly as good as it was 5 years ago. You know what I mean? When I first started. So, it's all a learning curve, man.
We won't keep you here much longer, but the final question that I have is, I know you're not a father yet, but you talk about wanting to start a family, with your wife, and your kid will grow up and your kids will grow up, different than how you grew up, right? In the sense that, they have this father who, has built a successful business, has, a very vast network across the world. How will you, guide them, right? And I'm not, and I want to use the word guide because you can't really tell your kids, at one point what to do, right? At 13 years old, you were already working, So how will you guide your future kids on life and their path and how to pursue the things that they love?
If and the reason why I brought up Joey so early in the convo is if I never met Joey, I don't know what I would be doing today, because I found my passion so early in life and not everybody is able to find that, and I think that forcing passions on people isn't possible. You know what I mean? Like I already have plans. I want my kid to play every sport, but like it doesn't mean he or she would like any sport, like I don't know. It's raising. I don't. The answer to your question is like I really am always thinking about that same question. Is like, what will my future kid, be like? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. And the fact that they're not going to be able to experience life the same way,
Yeah.
to have the kind of conversations that I've had with my friends, because communication is completely different. They're not going to have the same emotion toward like you can't have the same emotion to today's films than you did back then. You can't. It's impossible, because they're built for a different reason today. They're built for a
Yeah.
different audience who may not even understand the substance if they see it, because substance has a new standard. So it's like it's it's a very different day. And again, there are a lot of positives that come out of that, because I feel like people are smarter, they're quicker to understand things. They're, they're way quicker to adapt to different things. But what's going to be missed is the emotional connection to substance in all the different categories, because the way things were built, like you said, how much time was spent building those things. You know what I mean? And that goes for anything, the time that was
Yeah.
spent.
Yeah. You mentioned you can't, force passion on people, and I completely agree. But do you think that it's possible to put, let's say, your kids or just anyone in a situation where they could be exposed to more things, like, or do
Sure.
you think that meeting, or just like the people you met and the things that happened to you at a young age was purely serendipitous? Do you think that could be something that you could orchestrate?
Yes, I do. I think that it's important to, put your kids in a very diverse environment. And I don't mean just people, I mean cultures, sports, film, everything. Just have them be as cultured as possible so that they can pick a lane. You know what I'm saying? And I had to do that for myself, because I don't think my parents even knew how to do that. So they were new to the environment the way I was. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they moved to the States 2 years before I was born. Um, no, sorry, that's wrong. They moved to the States 6 years before I was born, because they moved to the year that my sister was born. I think they moved here. So
But I think it is very common for children of immigrant parents to feel that way, because they haven't been in the States for so long to understand how things work, and like what's
no,
even
sure,
interesting. It's just, they're just trying to figure it out at the same time. So it's probably
exactly.
very common.
Exactly. And like I feel like still today I'm like teaching my parents a ton of shit too. So it's like, it's weird how that comes full circle, you know what I'm saying? But um I feel like I was really blessed to grow up in the environment that I grew up in, though, because it did let me identify the lane very early on. And I think that was, I don't believe in luck, but if there is something that I believe in, it's hard work and direction. And I feel like I was fortunate enough to understand what I loved early on. Um, and that's why I think it's important to make sure that your kids are as cultured as possible so that they can pick a lane, like we just spoke about. It's very important. So it's a great point you bring up.
Yeah.
Ronnie, how would your parents describe you and Kith? If I had to ask them right now, if they were the ones being interviewed, what would they say about you and Kith?
I wish that people like understood my parents' personalities. Like I wish that people got to see and like hear. My father is the most frugal, like down to earth, anti-brand, like super just he's like Larry David. Okay, that's like my dad. My dad's like Larry David. I wanted to buy my dad a car when he had a 1994 Altima, and he was like, "Are you kidding? I'm gonna drive this thing until it falls apart. I will never just get rid of my car just to have a new one." That's the way my dad thinks, right? So, and my mom is the opposite. The polar opposite. My mom is like glamorous, even though she didn't have the funds to be as glamorous as you'd think. When you picture that, she was making the best of her situation to be as glamorous as possible. And she loves fashion. She loves, she has that way about her. So like, I think the combination of both of those things make me really appreciate everything I have. But also like I strive to be the best at it and be the biggest that I can be about it. So it's a very unique relationship that they have, and I think I'm a very unique combination of like the both of them, and thinking about what to do in certain situations. I really am split sometimes because I have both of those like little characters on my shoulders kind of trying to convince me to do certain things, and it's just a funny battle within myself.
Yeah, your dad reminds me of and my dad's the same way, of this TikTok video I saw the other day. It was this Armenian girl with her Armenian dad, and she was showing off her $75 Morphe brush, and her dad was next to her, and he's like, you spent $75 for a Morphe brush. What are you gonna do? Paint the fucking house with that brush? And he just like goes off about this $75 brush. She's like, Dad, it's Morphe. He's like, Morphe my ass. Like, who gives a shit? So it's like, but it's kind of cool to have that reminder, because even I can imagine as you're designing this stuff, for the people that know Kith, I mean, like, you're going in, it's like Tommy Hilfiger, Nautica, of course, like, you're collaborating with these people, but when I was growing up, Tommy Hilfiger wasn't high end, right? It wasn't like, high end luxury fashion.
But how old are you? You're 28, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tommy for us was high end fashion.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
10 years later, it was a different story. But like that was our high end fashion, because our age range, teens to like mid 20s, even early 30s, they weren't buying fashion house product. It was tiered differently. Fashion house was like selling to the older consumer, and Tommy, Nautica, Polo, they had that generation on lockdown because they built these worlds for these generations. So, very different. But to speak about like I don't tell my father what I spend on anything. You know what I'm saying? Like I cannot tell my dad. You know what I mean? Like he still shops in the supermarket and like buys the vegetables or fruits that are on sale. Like he doesn't understand the concept of spending extra money on anything that's not necessary. You know what I mean? Right. Unless it's necessary. Right. So it's
a good balance, though. I think it's a good balance to, and I think the pandemic has been I think he's probably enjoying this pandemic, because the one thing that I've learned is that you don't really need a lot, right? Like, you don't really need a lot of things that we have. Like, there's a lot of the basic things that you need in life, and that's about it. Everything else is extra, right? And I think that goes to your dad's point, and a lot of immigrant fathers probably have that same exact mentality of like, what's the point? Like, why are you spending like $100 on jeans? Like, I'll go get it from downtown for $20. That's the kind of mentality.
100%.
It's just how it is. We could probably talk for 5-6 hours here, and hopefully one day we can meet in person over drinks and dinner, and chat about our immigrant parents and way of life. But thank you so much, Ronnie, for spending almost 2 hours with us today. And we can't wait to see what comes next for Kith and you, and we're looking forward to you having a family and seeing how your kids grow up, and it's going to be a fun one. So thank you.
No doubt, you got it, and thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, it would be good to get together in person for sure after all this shit, and kick it and grab some coffee. So thank you guys. Absolutely. And I appreciate it. I'll speak to you guys soon.